Okay, so let's move on to today's topic. Again, the fascinating connection between neuroscience and coaching. Our featured member is Jeff Nally. Many of you, of course, know Jeff, but just to introduce him, Jeff is a nationally recognized executive coach, speaker, and author who applies neuroscience and coaching to help people interact with the brain and mind to create better leaders, teams, and organizations. Our facilitator today is Dave Allen, a California-based life coach and body coach who, through coaching and workshops, helps men live life on their own terms and find and live their dreams. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave to facilitate with Jeff. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, James. And I appreciate the introduction of both of us. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with Jeff today because, one, he has enormous passion around this topic, and his passion has led him to have a really deep understanding of how neuroscience comes into coaching and why that's useful and how we can all use it. And also I'm excited because Jeff has done some great thinking about what to offer today. And so his desire is that everybody leaves here with something that you can actually use in your coaching practice going forward, regardless of the type of coaching you do. So, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for sharing with us. I think the most exciting thing that I noticed when you and I were talking was that this has been a way for you to say yes throughout your entire career. So why don't we start there and give us a bit of an idea of how you got to be where you are, how you got into coaching, and most especially where the interest in neuroscience came from.
Sure, Dave. Thanks very much. And thanks everybody for including me. It's been a pleasure over the past year or so to be a part of these member calls and to hear you all talk about what you're passionate about and what your experience has been. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of that today. And we will have a conversation today. Dave and I have obviously designed this so that in our time together, we want to acknowledge that everybody on the call today actually has a brain. And so you know a lot already. And we want to share with each other what you know about the neuroscience of coaching, or how what you do that's brain-based or what you've experienced that's brain-based connects with coaching. So okay, Dave, so how did I get to this and why did I start caring? So my career has been mostly in human resources and training and development and leadership development. And after about 20 years of that, I noticed that I was doing some coach-like conversations with my presidents and CEOs. I was bringing in external executive coaches to coach in the companies that I led and worked in, mostly all manufacturing and then into healthcare a little bit later. So developing leaders in a one-on-one, highly customized way started to resonate with me. And after so many years in leading HR and manufacturing, I decided it's time to go to healthcare. And I live in Louisville, Kentucky. That's where I'm based. And Humana, the health insurance and health and well-being company, is headquartered here. They have a really unique corporate tower that was built in the 1980s. And I saw it go up, and I noticed how architecturally pleasing it is and how interesting it is. And for years, I led HR in corporate buildings around that building. So I would look out from the 19th floor and go, one day I'm going to work in healthcare, and that's the company I'm going to go to. Long story short, after working in HR and manufacturing for so long, I applied at Humana to work in HR. And the internal recruiter who did my interview asked me a great coaching question. She said, tell me what it is you love about what you're doing right now. And I said, well, I really like this one-on-one kind of training and development coaching conversations I lead with my president. I like bringing in external coaches. And she said, you know, I don't think you're good for HR for us. And my whole identity, right, was just crushed. No, I'm an HR person. I've always wanted to work HR at that company, in that building. And she said, actually, we're probably going to start an executive coaching practice. And I think you might be the right person to lead it. Why don't you come, meet our chief learning officer, work here for about 6 months, get the lay of the land, and then see where it goes. And that's exactly what happened. So my introduction to coaching was kind of through HR. And then once I joined Humana, it was, we need highly customized, one-on-one executive leadership development that focuses on questions and inquiry and coaches leaders to do things they never thought they could do before. So that's where my passion got struck and the lightning hit, and I thought, this is fantastic. I also got hit with kind of the big gut punch at the same time. Those of us who have on the call who have worked inside corporations before, inside for-profit businesses in particular, inside a company that's based on insurance, risk, finance, physicians, clinicians, and numbers people, they don't really get this coaching stuff. They're not having any of this black box, soft, warm, and fuzzy, having somebody follow me around and gather feedback from me. That is not something they are going to do. And I knew that our leaders were not receptive to that either. And so about this time, mid-2000s, we finally got more direct research, neuroscience research around coaching questions, around coaching interactions, thanks to the functional MRI cap and a few leaders who had pulled together neuroscientists and social scientists and said, why don't you study working brains of leaders in organizations and how coaching really affects them and what that means and how we can use neuroscience to help leaders be better people. That's what struck me. And I brought the neuroscience of coaching into Humana. It was the basis, the approach that we used. I hired external coaches with that approach to come in and coach. I began to become trained and certified in that as well. So my coach training is through the Neuroleadership Institute and their results coaching system. So did all my 151 hours in coach training over several years. Became certified at the PCC level at the International Coach Federation. And I also coached executives inside Humana, the C-suite and down about 4 or 5 levels in a company of about 55,000 people, and just loved it. And what I got to see is that the neuroscience of coaching worked. Closing story about why I'm passionate about this. After a couple of years of this neuroscience approach to coaching happening, the COO, who was strictly a numbers person and an operations person, called me in his office and he said, so I need to talk about executive coaching. And I thought, well, that's it. He's not interested in coaching. This is the death knell. We are not closing the coaching practice. There'll be no more coaching at Humana. He said, so, you brought in a few coaches to coach some people on my team. And, I'd tell you and the coach what I'd like to see happen in like 6 or 8 months, like what I think needs to be different about their behavior or who they are. And here's the way it looks to me. He said, it looks to me like the coach comes in and she takes the skull off the top of the leader's head and then sprinkles pixie dust and then puts the skull back on. And then people start behaving differently and doing all these things I really wanted them to do in the first place. So it was all I could do to contain my laughter to hear this guy who never says the words pixie dust actually describe coaching like that. And when he finished and I tried to suppress the laughter, I said, well, if you're not in the coaching sessions over 6 or 9 months, that's exactly what it's going to look like. It's going to look like something's happened to this person and they're doing, thinking, and behaving differently. And it's like somebody sprinkled pixie dust on their brain. So from then on out, the coaching practice at Humana continued to thrive, and the neuroscience approach to coaching was not only accepted, but kind of really glorified. And we spoke about how we started the coaching practice to other companies and shared our practice and what neuroscience could do for leaders inside organizations. So that's where my passion came from this and how I shifted from HR several years ago to now 11 years into executive coaching with the brain in mind.
Well, Jeff, that's great. And I love the image of pixie dust, because I think for anybody who does coaching, there's a piece of this that, you have all the tools, you have all the training, and then there's just something that's magical that happens with a client when a coach and a client really click, and it almost is magic. But you have some very specific pixie dust to share with us today. So can you give us kind of an overview of what you wanted to share?
Sure.
Because it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to just share my screen intermittently here, not during the whole session, but I put together like 5 different PowerPoint slides that summarize some of the key points around our conversation today, around the neuroscience of coaching, just to prompt our conversation. This certainly isn't all of it, but it's a PDF that's going to be posted on our website, so all the members can have access to it. And if you want it directly by email, I'm sure Dave or James will be happy to send it out. So you're not don't have to follow this. I just want you to know, if you just want to listen and not take any notes, you're welcome to do that, because I've written a few prompts down for you to take advantage of that. Really the primary thing to think about is that when we talk about the neuroscience of coaching, and I mean everything from mindfulness all the way to direct neuroscience that affects how a client accepts, thinks, and then shifts their behavior and changes as a result of coaching. When we think about all those things, I don't want it to be overwhelming. I mean, it's really all about, we all have a brain, and we all can do something that is simple. One of the things that I started 3 years ago, so I left Humana after 9 years there, started my own practice. I really wanted to coach in more organizations, not just the same one for 9 years. It was great fun, but it was kind of just that one company. I also wanted to speak more and to share a lot of different neuroscience applications for leaders and companies and teams. So I've been out on my own for 3 years now. And one of the first things I learned, and I hope as coaches, even though we're studying the science of it, even though folks like James are studying the actual competencies and process of coaching, is that we never forget it's really all about the simple application for the person that we're coaching. So I learned right away that most audiences don't want to hear about the neuroscience. They just want to know, how can you help us make better decisions? Most clients initially are not interested in the neuroscience. They just want to think better or think differently. And so I really want you to think about using simple, no-nonsense neuroscience to help people be more human. That's all this is. Using simple, no-nonsense neuroscience solutions and applications to be more human. So the first topic of conversation is, when you're coaching the brain, when you're coaching the brain of another human, there's 3 kind of basic areas of the brain that are highly engaged in your coaching and in their coaching experience. And how that dynamic between these 3 play out is really important to whether the neuroscience of coaching actually helps the client. So the first is our emotions, right? So I've got a little graphic on this slide that shows roughly where the limbic system, right, the emotional center of our brain is. It's right in the center core of our brain. That's where the amygdala is. And that's the filter through which we all experience everything. Emotions first, whether it's at the conscious or just below conscious level, we experience emotions first. And what's important in coaching is to have our clients with their emotions to be in a neutral to slightly positive state. So, if I'll just ask for a call out, and you can unmute for a second. So when when you have your biggest aha moments, where do they occur? Where are you when you have your biggest insights?
You mean in my body, or where am I physically when this happens?
Physically, where are you located?
In the shower.
Happens? In the shower, yeah. Where else? Where else do you have your best ideas, biggest insights?
Sometimes when I am meditating, I am not supposed to be thinking, but this is what things come up.
When you're on a date, is that what you said?
No, meditating. When I am
meditating. I thought you said on a date. I'm like, that's a bad idea.
Hey,
Yeah,
I was
meditating.
close. I thought he said mandating too, but
Yeah.
How about driving?
Yeah, driving.
Big place.
Yeah. Anybody else?
well,
Exercising.
hobbies.
Exercising. Yeah, that happens to me a lot too.
Yeah, I got that one too. Also, just, you know, when I can't get to sleep, it's probably because I'm thinking of something. So I try to turn that off, a little bit of meditation or mandating, whatever.
Yeah.
And and then, Dave, you need to be on mute.
There we go.
Sorry. Then what occurs is during sleep, I'll kind of either have the thought or I'll wake up with the resolve.
Right. A lot of folks have these ideas as they start to drift off to sleep, and they wake up in the middle of the night and then jot it down and go back, or when they first wake up in the morning. So we used to think all of these were random neuron firings. They're not. Your brain is in a specific state when that happens. And the first state that it's in is that your emotions are neutral to slightly positive. You're not overly negative, threatened, or triggered. You're not at your favorite sports game cheering on the team and overly excited in a positive way. Your brain, the emotions in your brain are literally in kind of a neutral state, or they're just slightly positive. And that's the emotional state that we want our clients to be in. Not all the time, but in order to have insights. We know their emotions are going to swing and shift and change in the coaching session, and that's okay. But we really want our coaching questions, and we want our coach-client interactions and those pivotal moments where we think that the client might be onto something, or we know they're thinking deeply about something. We want their emotions to be neutral to slightly positive then. So that's one of the key states and the key things that we want to think about. Now, you can do a lot of things with clients to help them get their emotions that way. And meditation, prayer, or 30 minutes of yoga before you show up will do it. But if you're like me, I coach leaders in companies and they don't have time to do 30 minutes of meditation before I show up. So there are some exercises and ways to get people at the beginning of a session to kind of clear their own space, to kind of get their emotions to neutral and slightly positive. So what are the things you do to kind of center your clients in 2, 3, or 5 minutes as you have coaching sessions with them?
Well, Jeff, one of the things that I always do is always start with a check-in. And as you're talking about that, you give them a chance to maybe vent some of the crap that's been going on.
Right.
And then you can start the conversation
Right.
as, so what good things have happened, or what worked well for you this week? And they start shifting in a different direction and thinking of different things. So.
Excellent. Great one. What else? What else do you do?
I literally say, what do you need to say in order to be present for today's conversation?
Nice, nice. Use your words. Right. What else?
Jeff, I would say trying to get somebody to go for, oftentimes in the middle of the day, their head is spinning, right? So try to get them with breathing, just simple breathing, to kind of get more into their body and just more centered and calm down the chatter a bit.
Right, so we can use the whole body, right? And the signals that the body sends to get the mind and the brain focusing to get emotions in that neutral to slightly positive state. What else?
I guide them through a meditation. It's just a 3-minute meditation, but they pretty much come expecting that. So we just kind of gather together, and then we're looking at our attention, and then there's some silence in there. There's about 2 of the 3 minutes of silence. And when they come out of it, then there's another minute or so where they get to kind of share what's there. So that first 5 minutes is kind of sacred. And then wherever they are, I just be with that.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Yeah, actual meditation, taking 3 minutes to do something that is meditative works. So those are great ways to get the coaching session, get their brain and their emotional state in the sweet spot, if you will, as the coaching session begins. There are lots of others out there. What I want to encourage all of us to do is to continue to use more neuroscience. And Tony, you mentioned that at the top of what you're excited about this year. How can we use the science of how we know emotions work to help drive coaching competencies that we're putting out in front of the client, to help get them to open up or to be and use what they need to use or be what they need to be. And their brains can actually help them do that. Turns out if we get their brain and their body out of their way, they do amazing things. And those aha moments and insights don't just come in the shower or on the drive home anymore. They come actually in the coaching session more frequently and more often and more because that's the environment that you set up, a brain-based environment for them to do that. The second one is focused on the prefrontal cortex. And in this graphic, it's the PFC. It's the small spot right behind your forehead where you take in new information, you play with 1, 2, maybe 3 ideas or things that are unfamiliar and tease them out. And then your brain decides what to do with that. Is this something to reflect on and think more about, perhaps have a new idea, a new perspective, before it makes a decision and then hardwires it and puts it someplace else? So this prefrontal cortex needs to be open. We say that a lot in neuroscience. Something is open in your brain or it's closed in your brain. In a functional MRI, it means it's green, like there's oxygen going to that space. There seems to be activity and it's not shut down or dampened by some other part of the brain. So it needs to be open. And then the LTM, your long-term memory, kind of the hippocampus and everything in literally the back of your brain, all the things that are stored, previous experience, how things used to turn out, all my old thoughts, things I don't need to think about, because if I do, I waste a lot of energy, like how to drive a car or where my office is or how to punch speed dial on the phone. All of that needs to be kind of turned off. We don't want our automatic pilot jumping in and taking over our clients' brains while we're coaching them. We really want them to be in their prefrontal cortex thinking new thoughts. So the dynamic here is that all 3 of these cannot be on at the same time. It turns out they cancel each other out really easily and in very unique ways. So for example, if our emotions are not neutral to slightly positive, we feel stressed or frustrated from the meeting we just came to, and now you're going to coach me. Or I'm feeling angry or threatened even for some reason. That actually shuts down the prefrontal cortex. So when our amygdala, when the emotional center of our brain is too active, then it will actually shut down the prefrontal cortex. And we don't hear as well, and we don't take in as much information, and our peripheral vision starts to fade away. And we really get clouded in what we experience and how we process information. We're not likely to have an insight. We're not going to have a new thought. We're not in a reflective mode. We're certainly not in a meditative state. And our heads are not clear. Our emotions have taken over. So we all know the extreme of that, which is the amygdala hijack. But even in subtle ways, especially coaching, it can happen. I'm coaching a client in a large global organization, and in our first 3 sessions, we cleared the space, and I noticed he just seemed to be a little hesitant, even though he was going through the process. And I said, "So, are you still okay with this kind of coaching engagement, this whole coaching relationship?" He said, "Yeah, but I have to admit," he goes, "when I open my calendar and I see that we're going to have a coaching session tomorrow, or I come in the office and I see on my calendar we're going to coach at 10 o'clock, I get a little anxious." And that's when I knew his brain was not really turned on in the right places during our coaching sessions, even though we were just getting started. He had this emotional threat that kind of kept ringing in the background, even though he was going through the motions. So we did a few things to kind of clear that, had some open conversations about what he expects out of coaching. Even though we had set some goals, he was not opening up yet. And by the end of that session, he was finally sharing exactly how he felt, what he thought his biggest challenges were. He named people and told stories about what was getting in his way. And that's when I knew his emotions are probably neutral to slightly positive. His prefrontal cortex is open because he's thinking. He's not relying on old experience and all the things he thought he knew, and now he's ready. So, based on this dynamic of emotions in a certain state, new thinking in an open space, and kind of putting all of our past on hold, what are your experiences? What are your thoughts about the dynamic between this and what might be happening with your clients and the people that you coach? Any examples of when one of these parts of the brain was turned on more than the other? and what happened in your coaching session with that client?
Oh, this is Harry, and I would say I would like to share an experience as being a client.
Great.
So sometimes the last thing I want to do is talk to my coach. And when I get on the call, he lives in South America, and he calls me. And I say, "You're the last person in the world I want to talk to." And then he gets it, and then he does whatever he does to accept that. And I find that if that's your attitude, if you're a client of mine, please say that. Do not call. That is not a good reason to not call.
Right, right.
You're thinking trash about this whole session. So I think it really works for me as a client to get in that state. Otherwise, there's no reason for me to be on the call. It's like going through a pantomime of some kind. It's
That's
not
right.
real. Yeah.
Feels really fake. Feels really fake. Great. Thanks for that experience. That's a great one. Yeah.
And I'll piggyback and share on that one too. And I still pick up the phone and call my coach. And when I'm done, I'm totally like, and I don't sense that he does anything different than he does. And when I'm done, I'm like, I'm so glad. What was I afraid of? You know? So what that does is it helps me understand when my clients call me what might be going on for them, or when they don't call me what might be going on for them.
Yeah.
And then to work with that.
Other experiences or examples, or maybe even your own perspective.
Here's one example. I have a client who came in and wanted to tell a big story. And it was very clear that she was quite energized by the big story. And I said, okay, this is great. Tell me about the big story, but I'm going to stop you somewhere along the line. And she did about 5 sentences. And I said, okay, stop. Now, what decision do you want to make out of this? So she had to flip from long-term memory sort of thing. And then she flipped into what decision do I want to do? And then I said, now, how does that make you feel if you were actually going to be proactive and make a decision there? So it's kind of like if you know these 3 things are switches to a degree, you can sort of give space to each one and move from one to the next. But stopping stories is one technique I think all of us have done before, where we want to stop them, then say, what's the through line? What's the decision? Where do you want to go?
Right.
It's kind of almost a formula for story taking.
Yeah, it is. It's a great one. Excellent. Other thoughts, other ideas? Okay, so let's discuss briefly this notion of, well, we don't want our clients to be robots, kind of always with their emotions neutral to slightly positive, you know. Isn't there dynamic that happens in the coaching session? Absolutely. And you've seen it. You can see your clients get excited about an idea or get motivated, or you can see and experience their fear around something they're trying to uncover and the fact that they have no confidence and no courage to move through that. So acknowledging and noticing the flow of emotions through the coaching session and knowing when it's useful to get the client back to neutral, to slightly positive, so they can open their thinking and have some new or different thought. Kind of like my client noticing that at the beginning of our sessions, he seems to be a bit distant. And so noticing that was taking away. So how can we get rid of that ping of fear, that ping of emotion every time he sees the coaching session pop up on his calendar? Turns out to be a way to then really open himself up to emotions. So I don't want to discount, and I don't mean to say we're trying to discount the notion of emotional flow in a coaching session. And I don't mean to think that to say that we should put the people we're coaching into a robotic emotional state. But remember that when they're likely to have a breakthrough, the dynamic between their emotions and their prefrontal cortex has got to be something like their emotions are in a neutral to slightly positive state. If they're not, we can't expect a breakthrough, an aha. We might expect a new piece of information. We might expect an experience. That's all useful. But this whole notion of, so what will you do now, is less likely to come if they're in a different kind of emotional state. All right, so let's talk about the next concept, which is 4 neuroscience keys to coaching with our clients. The first is creating certainty and clarity. So our brains love certainty and clarity. It's how we operate. In coaching sessions, as you know, that's pretty much the last thing we do. We create uncertainty. We go into what's ambiguous, and we help coaching clients move through things that do not have a lot of clarity to them, or they would have resolved them or done something about them before they ever contacted us. So we ride through this kind of seesaw, providing enough certainty and clarity to clients so that their brains stay open and they're not threatened or damp, or their emotions aren't really kind of getting in the way, to also inviting them into very uncertain, unclear spaces. And so what I've learned and what we know from practice, and I'm sure you all have done as well, is we need to provide as much certainty and clarity around all the trappings, the process, the things that are around the coaching space and the coaching session, so that the client, the person, and her brain or his brain can actually go through uncertainty and lack of clarity and ambiguity. So, if you go back to your coach training days, the whole notion of setting up the coaching agreement and the coaching space and the coaching circumstance. Where will this occur? When does it occur? What does the room look like? How will our time be spent? What do we do to plan the session? I know logistics and all of that sounds really mundane, but that's the place to hit the accelerator on certainty and clarity. All those coaching competencies that help us and the client organize our time, set our agenda, if you will, for the hour. What do you want to include for today? Deciding that we need to meet in a quiet space, not at a coffee shop, so that your brain can think, and holding to that. All the trappings that give us comfort and certainty and clarity about what's going to happen, give the client space to then explore uncertainty and to explore all the things that are not clear to him during the coaching session. So really be crystal clear and establish, co-create whatever certainty and clarity you need and the client needs, so that when you're in coaching, all that can be uncertain. And their brain knows, oh yeah, I'm still in a coaching session. It's 1 o'clock on Wednesday. This is when we do this. This is the right room because we agreed. It's on my calendar and we confirmed yesterday. All those signals send the brain, yes, you belong here. Yes, this is expected. No, this is not a threat. So that when as a coach, you offer the question, so if you could be anything that you wanted to be the year from now, even though it might scare you, who is that person? That's when the brain can entertain uncertainty and ambiguity. So tell me what you do to provide certainty and clarity for your coaching clients, knowing that some other parts of coaching are going to be very undefined and very unclear.
Jeff, I was just thinking about the participants of the programs that I teach, that sometimes there are a lot of contents and experiences that can be anxiety provoking. So how, and Jim here is a participant of one program, you have in another of my programs, so how do you get that tension between embracing the unknown or not doing the right things, and at the same time trusting the process? So what was coming up for me, Jeff, is how we build a relationship with our client with trust. So because there is trust from the client to the coach and to the process, then that trust and that clarity about the process and that trust is what will help the client to take risks and be willing to be uncomfortable and uncertain. The same thing I see in the program when people are learning coaching skills. It's like you need in some way to feel not knowing what you are doing, so eventually you can feel that you know.
That's right.
The same thing in supervision. Yeah. So how do you embrace that process and I think that this is very valuable. How to play now. It's interesting because many people feel uncomfortable about being in that space of not knowing, even coaches when we're coaching.
Right.
Not only our clients, but us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, if I don't understand what's going on, or if something is wrong, instead of embracing the known, or embracing not knowing and trusting the process.
Exactly. That's great. Yeah. And Jim and others I know who have worked with Damien, I mean, I just finished the coaching supervision 10-month, 11-month journey. And what was really interesting is before we started, Damien sent every syllabus, every document, every book, everything we need to know, the names and bios for everybody who was going to be in our class. So to create certainty and clarity, because when we got together in person, we knew our week together, our first 50 hours was going to be full of ambiguity. And so, you know, that's one way to make all that happen. Some people look at that as paperwork overload. No, you're sending all the signals to the brains of all the participants 3 weeks before. Here it all is. You won't digest it all at once, but now you know, and your brain can go through and figure out what that looks like. And then when we all met and he said, so you're not going to be comfortable for the next 5 straight days. We were kind of okay with that because we at least knew, oh yeah, there's all these readings. We knew what's coming. We know each other a little bit on paper. We're going to get to know each other this first week. And that gave us permission space to get very unclear. Other ideas, thoughts, how to create certainty and clarity and how you manage that.
Jeff, I'll just mention, I think it's worth considering too that I actually once took a course on group dynamics that the entire approach of the course was based on, there wasn't much presented up front. So there was a lot of ambiguity, but we were selected as people and we were told there would be much ambiguity. And so my point is that we were selected because we were so-called fairly comfortable with uncertainty. So understanding what I've witnessed as my clients, everyone has varying levels, right? Some people need to know exactly what's going to happen. Some people are, hey, this is an adventure. So there's quite a spectrum, right? And I think I've certainly experienced that with some of my clients. But to Damian's point, the coaching process, though, to have one fundamental structure for everybody to account, regardless of people's comfort with ambiguity, is important. But I think it's interesting to note the variance.
Great, thanks for that. So that's the first key to coaching with the brain in mind, if you will, is to create certainty and clarity, because we know the nature of coaching itself creates a lot of uncertainty and helps clients move through ambiguity. But let's not ever forget how important certainty and clarity can be, even around the most mundane things. Second key is to create curiosity. And we do that in a variety of ways. As coaches, we know how to do that through questions. The key thing I want to point out here is there's been some research done by Brad Owens, who was at the University of Washington, and now he's at Notre Dame, about what does humility look like for leaders in organizations. So we've known, for quite a while, those of us who have worked with leaders in organizations and looked at research, that humble leaders who lead with humility, seem to get more out of their teams. They seem to have higher performance. Why is that? And now we have some research that shows some ingredients to that. Some of Brad's research shows that there are two ingredients, two behaviors that really drive that. And one is curiosity. The second is learning, being willing to learn from people on your team, even though you're the boss and supposedly you're supposed to know more. But this notion of curiosity is important, right? When we're curious, our brains automatically jump into that emotional state that we want, neutral to slightly positive. Our prefrontal cortex automatically opens. You can't be curious unless your prefrontal cortex is green, on, open. And your long-term memory and your experience is dampened. It's turned off because now you're trying to think about something new and different. curiosity by itself throws the brain into the right state to have new ideas, to have insights, to think differently. So the power of the curious question is not just because it's magical. It's magical for a scientific reason. It's magical because it literally throws the client's brain into this insight state, and it shifts the gears so that the next thing out of their mouth is more likely to be an aha moment, an insight, or a new idea, or something they want to even explore more deeply. And I think that's important for us as coaches. When we see our clients really spinning out of control with their thoughts, or they're not sure where they're going, at throwing a very curious, seeking question out there, you can see it. It kind of stops them in their tracks. Their eyes kind of like deer in the headlights, and they have to think for a few seconds, maybe even longer than is comfortable for us. But when they're doing that, that's when we know their brain is in that state. And now they're not thinking about the problem, and they're curious about what might happen next. So I just want us to, as coaches, to embrace whatever we do, whatever questions we use, whatever setting we make, whatever meditation we lead that sparks curiosity. Because whenever we get our clients curious, then their brain is in the right state for them to have an idea and move themselves forward. And that's important for us to do. The third key is emotional literacy. Now, I'm not going to take us through a neuro-linguistic programming course. All of us know as coaches the power of emotions. I think what I've been finding over 11 years of coaching executives, and I realize it's a pretty narrow spot, but the folks I coach, they do not have names for emotions. They can't use their words to describe exactly how they feel. They use polarizing. I feel good or I feel bad. It's not very specific. And so one of the things we know that really helps clients and people's brains either dampen their emotions to get neutral or slightly positive, or just to be able to identify where they are, is to specifically name emotions. So I don't expect all of us to go out and become NLP certified. I'm certainly not. But we're as coaches, we get to explore a lot about emotional literacy. We have words and names we can use for emotions, but most of our clients don't. I print off a Google list of emotional literacy. Just Google emotional literacy or emotional vocabulary. Print off any diagram, any list, and give it to your client and say, I'm not going to make you an expert in emotional intelligence, but I want you to look at this list every time you're trying to describe how you feel to me, and I want you to use the specific exact word about how you're feeling. Are you confused, or are you feeling perplexed? Are you angry, or are you furious, right? It turns out when we accurately, specifically name an emotion, that also throws our brain right into that sweet spot. Even if we're feeling furious, saying that I am feeling furious dampens the amygdala and takes the emotions closer to neutral than letting fury spiral our emotions out of control. That's what's really, really key in helping our clients. Just get them smarter about naming emotions, because when we name emotions accurately, functional MRI research shows the amygdala drops. The limbic system dampens. It goes from red to yellow to green pretty quickly. And then I can make a different choice. If that hasn't happened, my emotions override whatever I'm going to do or say or think next. So what have you all done to either create curiosity for your clients or help them with their emotional words?
I've forbidden the words okay and fine. You're never allowed to say, how do you feel? Fine.
Fine. That's excellent. That's great. So a list of forbidden words. That's gotta help. That's a great one. I love that. What else have you all done? What else creates curiosity or helps folks get a little more emotionally literate?
Well, one of the things clients sometimes say is, how do you feel? And they say, I don't know. and then they say it again, and then again, and I say, you're only allowed 3 I don't knows in this one session. So the 4th time, you have to pick a word. So choose a word, see how that works. It's amazing that that is a passable expression in the world they live in. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. 3 strikes and you're out. And here's your sheet. Pick a word that tells me exactly how you feel, because you just did 3. And you said, I don't know 3 times, and that's not going to fly. That's excellent.
No, so something else heard about that is when my client said, I don't know, I stay quiet. And many times, if you stay quiet, they may have something else to say after I don't know. Because I don't know is the lazy answer, is the automatic answer where you don't have to do much work. But my experience is that after they say I don't know, you stay quiet and don't say anything, they may come up with something. Not always, but sometimes.
Mm.
Now, what I want to say about emotional intelligence is that I think many times, Jeff, clients have issues around emotional intelligence, but they cannot articulate it to say,
Right.
that's the reason why I want coaching. So they would say, I want a coaching because I want to have a better relationship with my boss, or want to have a better relationship with my partner. And when you start exploring what is that, what does it look like, it's about being able to communicate better and to manage emotions more effectively.
It is.
So for example, particularly with executives, I use a lot the emotional intelligence 2.0, and I use that in my coaching trainings too, like as a way to give the book to my clients. And as a way for them to become more literate about that is just do the test, get the measurement of your emotional intelligence, and then let's talk. Yep. And definitely naming and articulating in words the emotions is one of the techniques from the book, like that really help to manage your emotions more effectively.
Great, yeah, exactly. Thanks for that. It's such a big part of what happens in coaching, even if we don't think it looks that way at the beginning. And if, as you do this, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, as your clients get better at naming and identifying their own emotions, that's the key to empathy. Remember, if they can do that for themselves, they can start identifying and naming emotions of people in the room for themselves to get a better understanding of how they think others might be feeling. Otherwise, they're really shooting in the dark. So it is important as one of the 4 keys of the neuroscience of coaching to get our clients to become at least emotionally literate so they can be smarter and identify their own emotions and articulate them to us. Because if they can't do that to us as coaches, they're not going to be authentic and open to themselves after we leave them, and they're not likely to be able to carry out that emotional level of effectiveness after coaching ends. Okay, one more key to coaching, and that's the last topic to share, is to really dampen the fear of feedback. So whether you're leading a 360 survey with your client, or whether you're going to go out and do interviews and gather feedback for your client, we all know the notion, or whether we ask our clients to go out and gather their own feedback informally. The process of doing that and the actual experience of gathering feedback still triggers the primal parts of our brain. There's no getting around it. I haven't seen any assessment or any process yet that is fear-free with respect to feedback. So it triggers all of the same emotions we have when we were cave people and we were just trying to run away from the lion, the tiger, or the bear. It really sparks that. So one of the keys to coaching is to help clients dampen their fear of feedback. There's 1,000 ways to do that. Provide certainty and clarity around the process, right? Have the client come up with the questions you're going to ask in the interview. I've learned that regardless of which assessment survey tool I use or which report spits out, right, for the client, there are some ways I can help the client go through that report and experience it, and actually give them specific guidance so that it can dampen the emotional triggers they have the first few times they go through it. Some of those that I share with clients are, so in this report, I don't want you to sit and read it cover to cover. The first thing I want you to do is just scan it to get familiar with the format and the chapters and how that's laid out, and then set it aside. And then later that night, go back and decide you're going to look at the strengths section and read what people said you did really well. And then set that aside and go to sleep. And the next day, then go through the challenges or the feedback that is, you need to get better at this. And highlight the words that don't look familiar to you, right? Oh, they said I need to be more relaxed. I would never have said that about myself, relaxed. Give them certainty and clarity and process, because that will dampen down the fear that's inside the content of the feedback. We don't want to totally take away the emotional experience they're having about feedback. That's not what I'm trying to say, but that first 1 to 5 days that a client has feedback in his hands is a real big opportunity for them to check out, because it's too painful, there's too much to do here, and they literally don't know how to get their heads around it. And as coaches, I think we need to spend more time and effort and clarity guiding people through a way to take the feedback in a brain-based way that lets them digest it in pieces and gives them some certainty and clarity, even in the midst of all that content that is really threatening and needs to be a signal to help them get better. So what do you do to help dampen the fear of feedback with your clients when it's time to gather, give, or receive feedback? I know it's kind of a new one. It's not something that we think about a lot. And no offense to any coach trainer, I never had a full day of coach training about how to dampen feedback and get people to embrace it. Well, I'll leave that as curiosity for all of us to think about as well, with respect to how might we provide certainty and clarity in the midst of tough feedback, but also do some things that offer some guidance so our clients don't become overwhelmed and detached in that first several days of digesting it.
Jeff,
Yeah.
One little thing tweak for me. I don't know if this is along the lines of what you're looking for. When I'm working with a client and there's an opportunity to do feedback or they're looking for feedback, I'll ask them if they have the space for that.
Yeah.
And basically asking permission, you know.
That works.
I have some ideas. I have some feedback. I was wondering if you'd like to hear it, and it's okay if you don't.
Yeah. Good. Do you have the space for that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of space, one of the things I've started doing with clients is just to be on the safe side. I make sure I don't send them the report more than like 24 or 36 hours before our next session. Right? I'm not withholding it, but I want to give them a little space, and I email them some guidance, but I don't want a week to go by before we get together and take a dive together. Some coaches I know won't even give feedback by email as a start. They want to take 2 hours and sit down and they go through the first look together. That will work as well.
So the only thing that I would add to that, Jeff, is asking the client how they like to receive feedback and what is their relationship with feedback, because sometimes people have negative experiences in the past, so they are defensive.
That's right.
So I would ask, what would it take for you to not be defensive and to see this as a learning opportunity?
Put them in the driver's seat. Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to this is in the PowerPoint. I'll just offer this as some additional resources to think about before we go to open Q&A and whatever else needs to happen to wrap up. I wrote 2 chapters in anthologies where I shared some of this, the neuroscience of coaching, in Rethinking Human Resources, where I tailored it toward HR professionals. And then in Humans at Work, where I laid out how do we get people's brains in this state so they can have those insights and spark ideas on an ongoing basis, not just in a coaching session. So some good coaching questions and some guidance might be in these books for you. They are available at Amazon. I make no money off of them. All of the proceeds from the sale of the book go to the SHRM Foundation, Society for Human Resource Management, and they go toward scholarships. Toward people who want to pursue an HR degree or a certification, and to research around HR. So all the authors and I got together and decided that's how we'll not make money off this, and that's what happens with the proceeds. But if you want some specific coaching questions, or if you want to read 10 pages of my own thinking around these and those books, you're welcome. The next page are some additional resources that Dave and I put together earlier this week about where can we get more information. And the first, drum roll, Gary, is from Choice Magazine. Volume 7 was around the neuroscience of coaching and the brain. And the good news is the PDF is still available for sale. So please go online and get that. There's no more hard copies, but go online and take a look at that.
Well, actually, I'll just interrupt there, Jeff. What I was offering is, Dave has a copy of this, is everybody gets a copy of this issue. Nobody has to buy it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary.
So, and so you can get that and do whatever. And anyone that wants to subscribe to Choice, use the code Friends of Choice, and you get $5 off at choice-online.com. Email me if you need any more info.
Yeah.
Back to you.
I love my Choice magazine. And I can't live without it. It's really a great one. And I actually loved it before I met Gary. So, just goes to show, meeting Gary doesn't dissuade you from purchasing Choice magazine.
Or joining the GCA.
Or joining GCA. The other books here are two by David Rock. So he's the one of the first thought leaders who got neuroscientists to get together and research coaching so that we could figure out what this looks like. He's off doing other things now, which is fine. It's mostly for organizations. He's got his own intellectual property. But he did write two really good books. If you really want to think about how you can use neuroscience of coaching, Your Brain at Work is a story. It's a narrative of a husband and wife. He's a stay-at-home IT consultant, and she just got a new job as a marketing exec. And each chapter takes them through part of their workday where they make bad decisions or do things that disengage their brains or other people's brains that they're trying to shift. Then David shares just some simple neuroscience around it, how that works. And then he replays that scenario where they use their brains and they use neuroscience approaches to get those results. It's great. Quiet Leadership was the book he wrote back in 2004 about how to get leaders to be coaches and shift people's performance. The book was a miserable failure as a leadership performance book. It's a great textbook or a refresh for anybody who's a coach around the coaching process and coaching competencies where the neuroscience is stacked up against every stage of the coaching engagement and every competency. The first 2/3 of the book includes tons of brain-based coaching questions that he and other researchers have already looked into to say, this is what will get your client's brains to spark. So that's a good one. And the final book is one that Dampen connected me with as part of our coaching supervision course. It's not a supervision book, but it's the Neuropsychology for Coaches by Brown, and Paul. Paul, I think, is the editor. And it's a really, really good book. It's written for coaches. The neuroscience is that's included is about practical applications, but it really does talk about where this neuroscience, these pieces of neuroscience came from and how they're helpful for coaches and our clients. And I'm really impressed with the simplicity that it shares, but also the breadth and scope of neuroscience that's included in it. So you think it would be like a textbook, but it's not. It really is a book that I think is useful for any coach. So I'll offer those up as well as resources, and you can find all those on Amazon. And if we're not connected, please let's connect, because on social media and other places I post new and recent research about neuroscience. So you're welcome to do more open Q&A, or if Dave and the group want to take this someplace else, this conversation elsewhere, then we can do that.
Well, so first off, thank you, Jeff. This has been amazing and so great just to be able to sit back and hear what you have to say, share your enthusiasm, your depth of knowledge, and also hearing what the other coaches have to say. I think at this point we have time for one, maybe two quick questions, and then we need to wrap it up. So let's see if anybody has a couple of questions for you, and we'll bring it to a close.
Jeff, this is Harry, and I wonder, with the time you spent studying this, if you have any inklings about where all this is going as far as coaching goes.
Yeah, so one of the more recent research tools that we have now is a way for researchers with a cap on people's heads is to see where the oxygen flows in your brain, not just which parts of your brain are active, and where the oxygen molecules gather. Where are they congregating? How do they flow? And so I think for coaching, we've always talked in coaching about getting the body ready and taking deep breaths to get people centered. I think the oxygen of how our brains work and react will eventually be able to tell us even more as coaches, how could we get more oxygen flowing to that part of their brain if this is the fear they have right now, or if this is the insight they had? What can I ask, and what can we do, and what can they do to shift oxygen to the right place now that we know more about how oxygen moves through the brain? I also think that the second part of the answer to the question is we never lose the art of coaching. We've had more of that since the coaching profession began and evolved. Now we have more science to put with it. Some of it just confirms that's how that piece of art works. And in other places, I think the science actually is a piece of art. So let's all keep the science and the art of coaching happening with our clients because they're both important.
Jeff.
I have a question, Jeff. I'm fascinated by the idea of the green light going on when you have your head in an MRI machine. Is there any kind of a homemade MRI machine or something I could get at a sharper image that would do this? And do you ever do anything like that with your clients?
No, I don't. Now, some of the closest things we have to that are the heart math biofeedback machines where you put your fingers on the mouse. Those tend to work. I mean, if you can get people to do that, then their blood flow and we think their emotions are in that state. Dr. Dan Siegel has a new cap that is apparently shows functional MRI results in real time, but you don't need a functional MRI machine. And he's using that with leaders and teams, and it's portable and you can put it on people in a coaching session. So I am digging into that right now to find out, where is that cap? Is it for sale yet? How does it actually work? And how is it different from other brain feedback tools? So lots of those tools coming out now that people are aware of. Well, I can't just put my hands on a functional MRI kit, but how do I get what's green, red, and yellow and what's activating in different parts of my brain? Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Jeff, as I told you when we first talked about today's session, that I could geek out with you for hours on this. I really love this topic, and it's such a rich one, and I'm looking forward to you presenting at the conference. But unfortunately, we have to bring it to a close today. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your enthusiasm, your commitment to helping the GCA members grow in their own individual coaching practices. And also thanks to Gary for his generosity. I reached out and asked, how can, we find a way to create a link so people can buy this? And his immediate response was, well, I'll give it to them. And I just want to make an offer that, people get a little bit off. And so he's giving again. So thank you so much, Gary. Thank you for Choice having sponsored the conference for so many years. And I'll get the PDF to Alan. And Jeff, if you can get your slides to Alan, we'll go ahead and get those out announcing the recording of the call.
Yeah, and Dave, Alan did post the PDF in the chat. So it's already out there. And if you want to download it while the chat's still open, it's there.